Hello, welcome to Image Bearers. My name is Atoma Eji. I'm very excited to have some good friends on the program tonight. I'm sure that you guys have tuned in for a good time, and we definitely promise to deliver, and I'm sure it's going to be fun. So this is Season 3, Episode 43. For those of you that may not know, this is a video podcast that is designed to help us better understand the scriptures, human nature, and history as we strive to honor God with our lives. And prayerfully today, we'll have a chance to get to know Brent a little bit more, who we'll discuss in a moment, and also have some fun. So that is our intent today. So as I alluded to, our special guest today is Brent Billings, who is Marty Solomon's co-host in Bema, which is a podcast that has been running for a number of seasons. A lot of us are very impressed with the show and wanted to have him on today. So we are going to start out by discussing Bema and then transition into some discussion about The Chosen, which is an awesome TV series. And at the end, we'll have a chance for some Q&A. So put on your seatbelts. And like I said, get ready for an awesome time. Again, Brent, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, and this is the setup. This is my podcast mic. These are my podcast blankets behind me. And so this is it. This is what I do.
All right. All right. I like that voice. I'm used to that voice. So that's awesome.
I do have a little bit of a sore throat this week, which is insane because we've recorded 3 episodes this week, plus this event. So of all the weeks for me to have a sore throat, this is terrible. So I'm going to judiciously use my mute button and probably do a little bit of throat clearing off mic. But yeah, if there's anything weird about my voice compared to normal, it's probably because of that.
No problem. No problem. You are in a safe zone, so we'll take it a step at a time.
Thank you.
Also joining today, I'm always excited when we have co-hosts that are able to come on and offer some different perspectives. So we have from Canada, so we are international today. We have Tony and Melanie, who have, they're just building an awesome empire for God out there. And we may get a chance to talk about that. We'll see. And then also we have my good friends, Damon and Ivy, who are from Appleton, Wisconsin. They lead the church there. And if you don't know, definitely get a chance to learn about Damon's conversion story. It's awesome. I'll just leave it at that. So again, guys, welcome. And thank you for joining the podcast today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Amen. Well, let's go ahead and start it out. Damon and Ivy, you want to start us up?
Yeah, I've got the first question for you, Brent. For those who are new to Bema Discipleship, can you please explain what the podcast is about and how it started?
So Bema is basically walking you through the Bible and giving you all of the details, all of the backstory, all of the history, all of the cultural context that you don't necessarily get from reading the Bible without someone to walk you through that. So knowing like Genesis 1 or really, maybe the flood. Let's talk about the flood. So going through Genesis 6 through 9 and knowing like, okay, so when the Israelites are talking about this story, the context of all of the cultures around them and their stories about the flood and what those stories tell their cultures about their gods and how the Israelite story of the flood tells a completely different story about who God is. So it's kind of like you've been on this very narrow path of faith, and everything has been streamlined and very rigid, and it's like, this is the way it is, this is the one way, and you just don't have all those other ideas. So we're bringing all of those ideas to the table. It's mostly Marty. I was a student of Bema before I was on the podcast. But it's bringing all that stuff to the table, and we don't care if people come and look at all this stuff and then land right back where they were with all of the same beliefs that they had before they started. But we just feel like it's valuable to know that the conversation out there is so much wider. There are so many faith traditions, looking at the Jewish context of stuff and like gleaning the knowledge that we get from Jewish understandings of the text. They've spent, theoretically, we've spent a couple thousand years with the text, but the Jews were spending a couple thousand more before that. So like,
yeah.
There's just so much conversation and wrestling that's been going on for so long. And for us to only look at stuff since the Reformation or whatever, which I think is pretty normal. Like if we're only really going back a few hundred years, we're missing out on so much of the conversation. So we just want to bring that all to the table. And Marty and I don't necessarily agree on everything. I think I certainly, I consider myself I don't know if I should say disciple necessarily, because I'm not following him around like we talk about on the podcast. But I do like Marty is the source of most of what I have learned. And so I definitely defer to him. But I mean, I'm an American Christian too, so I have my own ideas on a few things. But yeah, so we're just bringing it all to the table and saying, this is the conversation. This is what we've learned. This is what we've seen in the last few years since we started looking into this stuff, and just opening up the conversation to people and letting people wrestle with it for themselves and come to their own conclusions. And for me personally, it has made my faith so much stronger, my understanding of God so much richer. And so the podcast started in 2016 so Marty had been doing these classes for a while. And I got involved in about 2013. And then at some point, Marty's job was changing and he wasn't able to teach his classes the way he had been. And we had some interest from some other campus ministers around the country that we're associated with through Impact Campus Ministries. And so Marty's like, well, we need to turn this into a podcast form so that it's easier to get to the other people. Little did we know that it would be so much wider than a few associated campus ministries. But that's how it started. 2016 is when we got going with that.
Interesting.
Yeah. You mentioned that that first he was doing this and then you kind of came on. Can you kind of explain a little bit about yourself, like your faith journey, and then how did you even meet Marty? How did you get to Impact Campus Ministry and, get to meet him and start this?
Yeah. So I grew up in a Christian house. I think I went to a vineyard church when I was super little. I don't really remember it. I just know that it happened. Right. And I have a few like very vague images of what that was like in my mind. But mostly I went to a non-denominational Christian church in Wichita, Kansas. And my mom had some friends who were Catholic, and we ended up converting to Catholicism. And so I was doing that for about 3.5 years, and then ended up deciding that wasn't really the faith that felt like was right for me. So I think in 6th or 7th grade, I started going back to the church that I had been attending originally. Went to a Christian school, did the typical evangelical sort of fundamentalist view for a long time, and then eventually moved up to Idaho as I was going into high school, worked at my church there for a while doing video production, and then ended up moving down to Moscow at an associated church in 2012. And Marty had come to Moscow in 2010 to do campus ministry. And so I think in 2013, like I knew Marty a little bit from, he was preaching every once in a while. So I knew him a little bit from there, but then I started going to his Bema classes in 2013. And I think he started that in 2011. And his journey more or less began in 2008 when he went to Israel with Ray Vanderlaan. So he started working through those ideas around that time. And then by 2011, he started packaging them up into what is now Bema and teaching through them. And so I came in on the second Bema 2.0, essentially.
Sure.
Yeah.
Nice.
So you get asked what, at least for listeners, seem to be impromptu questions during your podcasts. Do you find yourself having to study a lot so that Marty doesn't catch you off guard, or you don't sound like you don't know what you're talking about? How much preparation do you have to put into the podcast for studying?
So it's evolved a little bit over the years. So I did go to that first iteration of Bema. That was a full round from like 2013 to 2015, and then started to do a second round. And that 2015, 2016 school year is when Marty figured out that things were going to have to change with how he did things. So we kind of went through session one. We went through Torah like at a normal pace, and then we did the rest of the material in a semester. So very like technically 2 full times, but the second half or the second half of the second round was very abbreviated. But then I went to Israel and Turkey with Marty. So you kind of go through the entire material between Israel and Turkey, more or less. And then, so I've been through it essentially 3 times to some degree or another. And so when we first started recording, like we didn't know how we were going to do things. The first few episodes, Marty would like script a few questions like, hey, make sure you ask me this here. Make sure you ask me this here. And sometimes I would have my own questions, but it was kind of like we were feeling out how we were going to do it. Eventually we just realized like we don't really need to do that. And I didn't really have a whole lot of extra time to study at that point because it wasn't part of my job. It was completely a side project for me. So most of the time I'm either pulling from knowledge or memory from previous rounds of Bema, or I've completely forgotten about whatever it was, and it's just like an honest question in the moment. Or sometimes, sometimes Marty does give me a few prompts like, hey, make sure if I don't talk about this by the end of the episode, make sure you bring that up. But most of the time it's just as we go. But then I started working for Impact Campus Ministries, and Bema is a pretty large portion of that, 50 to 75% of the job typically, depending on the week. And at that point, I had more time. So when we started recording session 5, I had the chance to, like, I read through Marty's whole church history college textbook. I had a chance to do that. So since session 5, I've been able to put a lot more prep work into it and bring some of my own study and stuff into it. But the first 4 sessions, I was just going off of memory and whatever else. And, you know, I try to be honest as I'm editing the podcast. If I don't know the answer, I try to let it show in the podcast. I do, like, if it's taking me a really long time to come up with an answer, like, I'll shorten that so it's not so painful to listen to. But yeah, so that's how that works.
Yeah, I appreciate that there are even times you're like, I don't know. Like, I can relate to that.
Many times.
Yeah. So this is a little different type of question, but in your opinion, what elements of modern Christendom get either shrouded or just lost altogether when compared to what you guys cover, the ancient Judeo-Christian or apostolic traditions that you guys talk about, that you look at and think, man, I wish that wouldn't be shrouded or lost, because we'd learn so much from it.
You're saying stuff that used to happen in the early church that no longer happens now?
Yeah, that maybe even could happen now, but because we're so locked into this Western mindset that we just kind of carry on, like what you were talking about before. You know, you get kind of stuck in the way that you've been taught, and because you don't dig deeper, you don't know about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and probably my best example of this came from before Bema, but the idea of, like, Acts 2, like, they met together daily in the temple courts. They broke bread together in their homes. Hebrews talks about encourage one another daily. So just that, like, day by day, like every single day, not just Sunday and Wednesday night when you get together with a small group, but like actually daily. And I sort of had a community like that from about 2007 to 2012. Before I moved to Moscow, we had the house that I lived at was it was literally open all the time. And like part of it is the fact that I wasn't married. It was a bunch of single people with completely free schedules to do whatever they wanted. So I realized there is that element of the reality that does change things today. But people would just drop by my house all the time. And we had a Friday night thing where it was typically like a movie night, but we had like Fridays were definitely like doing something, like scheduled, like some sort of more event style thing is happening. But every single day there was somebody at the house, like just to stop by and have a bite to eat, or to talk to one of us about like, hey, I was studying this thing. Like, what do you think about this? To have those types of conversations. It was totally organic and natural. And I think that's what the early church was probably closer to being like. And man, I just wish like today, everybody feels like they have to have their own home, their own space. And not that those are bad things, but there's just, we put up all these barriers and we don't poke enough holes in them to say, hey, I realize I have my own house, but like, come over whenever you want. Like, I'd love to hang out and talk. So, and I've had more or less of that at points since I've been here. But like being married changes that. You have different responsibilities. Having kids really changes that.
Sure.
So there are different realities about what life is like as I've gotten older that do make that more challenging. But I do think it's possible if an entire community can be on the same page about it and be intentional about it. I think it is possible. But I'm still striving for that at this point.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's an incredible observation. And I think it comes back to living life as a family, that we're the family of God. So it makes sense to live that way, but not necessarily the way we do life here in America,
Right. Cool. Yeah, exactly.
Do you have a favorite Bema season? And if so, why would you pick that one?
So, I mean, it's very challenging to pick one because
which is your favorite child?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So they definitely all have their advantages. I want to say, I mean, I knew a lot of the Old Testament stories, like the stories, but I didn't know, I'd never been able to engage with Leviticus. That was always nonsense. So having a framework to understand what is even going on in Leviticus, even if I'm not like reading it every day, at least being able to understand, like when I come across, like Jesus references Leviticus. So when he's referencing it, what is going on there? What is he pulling from? So I probably session one, because like learning about chiasms and learning about the literary structures, the different techniques that they use, learning about like the idea of imagery, like the trees that we talk about, and the idea of a shepherd and the idea of voice, understanding those things.
Sabbath.
Yeah, Sabbath, no kidding. Didn't mention it because I'm terrible at it. But yeah, all of those things, it's just the foundation. Like it is the beginning. So if you don't have that, it's definitely a struggle. But I mean, session two, like the prophets have always been, not quite as bad as Leviticus, but pretty close in like, how can like this, it's, how do you understand this? So, and then session three, obviously Jesus is doing so much more than you realize. The gospel writers are doing so much more than we realized. So, there's goodness throughout the whole thing, but if I had to narrow it down to just one as a favorite, session one is probably where it's at.
Thank you. 2 in a row?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Well,
I'm gonna get the next
one. He kind
of
answered the last one there.
What are some of your favorite aspects of Bema session one? You did touch on it, so I'm not sure why I'm asking the question again.
Well, yeah.
My wife told me to do it, and so
no, I said
good husband,
go to the next question, not that.
She whispered in my ear, Brent.
Well, I mean, I can talk about some other stuff. Like there's a lot of depth to it. Like we talked about Noah before, like knowing the flood story, and like what God is doing with that, and like the understanding of how covenants worked, and like, oh, God is like the blood path covenant with Abraham. It's like, oh man,
That was crazy.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah. So like understanding the family of God and how God wanted to partner with people, like seeing like I knew those stories, but I didn't, for whatever reason, I didn't like catch like, oh, these stories are repeating. Like we're seeing the same thing in Isaac that we saw in Abraham and stuff like that. So yeah, there's lots to uncover there for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
I got the next one. All right. Okay. So what do you love about being involved in Bema, and what is the hardest part about working on the Bema podcast?
Besides losing your voice and
Right.
having so many episodes that you need to do in 1 week, and then you get asked to come on Friday to
Yes.
hang out with some Canadians who are very mean.
Yes.
And some people who like apples.
Well, I do like apples very much. I had apple pies for my dessert at my wedding. So,
Oh, nice.
yeah. I mean, I love doing stuff like this. I love talking to different people and seeing like what is your story? How did you find Bema? What's your faith journey been like? So I absolutely love that. I've tried to talk to as many, like when the pandemic happened and every discussion group moved to Zoom, it's like, let me pop in and talk to you guys. Oh man, I'm having a hard time right now. Sorry. This is the hardest thing, this coughing. It's terrible.
So sorry. It's terrible.
But yeah, I don't know. I think the hard thing is not being able to do everything. like I want to travel around and like meet every single group, because every time I've joined a group, it's like, wow, there's something special and unique going on in this group that I haven't seen in any other group. So that's the hard part, is just like, I can't be involved in all of it. So yeah, that's a struggle for me.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, hi, Brent. Melanie here. So the question that I have is, how has being involved with Bema, affected your understanding of the Bible? And then more importantly, how has it affected how you've lived out what you've learned?
You can start with the Sabbath. I'm just kidding. I still need to get on that myself, buddy. So we're in the same boat.
Honestly, I thought the Sabbath was just like how you figured out what day you had off work.
Yeah.
And it was just that simple. And like, but no, the whole idea is to rest and like begin with rest. Like that's the beginning. It's not the end of the week, which like our language totally makes that difficult to talk about it, because Saturday or Sunday or whatever is the weekend. It's like, no, it's not the end of the week. It's the beginning.
Right.
And in every single day, there was evening and there was morning. Like I tell my 3-year-old, I was like, okay, buddy, as soon as you, and I think my parents told me this when I was little, but I'm like, okay, as soon as you go to sleep, like tomorrow begins. So we've got all this stuff to do tomorrow. So that can't happen until you go to sleep. So, the Sabbath is a great challenge, a huge challenge, because I do want to do everything. I do want to be involved in every story. I do want to respond to every email, to every message, which, by the way, I'm glad that I got back on here, because Atoma sent me a message on Twitter a long time ago, and it somehow got filtered out, and I didn't know it was there. So this has been months in the making, and he was bold enough to continue trying to get in touch with me and made it happen. So good work.
Bold.
Yes, I love it. But yeah, like as far as like just trying to get my kids to understand like the power that is in the text, and like trying to, like I went to a Christian school when I was a little kid, and I was memorizing scripture in first grade, but then I didn't really understand like the power to it. Oh man, this is the kind of, I would edit all of these out if I was podcasting.
Love live podcast.
This is raw, man. This is raw. We don't play around in Detroit, man. It's raw, man.
Yeah. Well, there have been podcasts like this, and I've been able to edit it, so I'm completely out of control here. This is crazy.
This is the original podcast.
That's right.
Yeah.
Before editing was invented.
That's right. So, yeah, like just trying to like, because I had some of these elements growing up. I was memorizing scripture, but I didn't really understand why I was doing it so much. And so I'm hoping that I can pass on to my kids what I had, but also give them a better foundation of like, this is the power behind what you're learning. And this is like, this is applicable to life, and this will come back useful in some way at some point, and just knowing that you need to get it in you.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
That's great.
Fantastic. There's little doubt that this podcast is going to stir a lot of things in people's hearts.
Mm-hmm.
And given the fact that it's affected so many different people from different walks of life, if you were to give some advice, how would someone go about starting their local Bema Bible study group, and how should they get started? How should these individuals get started?
So I think just doing it like is really the biggest thing. Like, you don't have to be this great leader. You don't have to have a bunch of questions figured out. You don't have to have a Bible college degree. Like, it really doesn't have to be complicated. You can make it more complicated if you want to, but it really doesn't have to be. It can just be simply like sitting down and reading a passage and talking about it. That's really the whole idea of the podcast, is to drive people to spend more time in the Word. And so if you've got one other person who wants to talk about it with you, like you've got a Bema group, it's really that simple. So many people have groups that they don't realize are groups.
Yeah.
They're not on our map. They've never told us about them, but they have a Bema group. And like, Bema doesn't have to be the only thing you discuss. You can bring elements in from all over the place, but it really doesn't have to be complicated. So that's probably the number one thing. And we, like, on the Bema website, we have a groups page, and we have a brief guide that kind of gives like some starting, but it's such a simple guide. Like, many people read it like, hey, I read that, but so what do I actually need to do? It's like, no, it's really that simple. Like, you don't have to make it more complicated. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Brent, as we close out this kind of section of the questioning, what do you see in Bema's future?
So we just recorded one of the episodes we recorded this week was with Reed Dent, who is on the podcast in session 6 earlier this year, and he is going to be one of the new like regular hosts of the podcast. So we're going to have 5 regular hosts, me and Marty, and then 3 other people that we're bringing in. So we're going to introduce those other people in the coming weeks. Reed, we already know about from an earlier episode. And then we've got Josh Basset. If you're in the Bema Slack, you'll probably recognize his name. He's doing lots of great conversation there. And then Elle Fricks. And I met her for the first time when I went on the Bema trip in 2016. And she studied in Jerusalem and just has like so much knowledge about like the Hebrew scriptures and the original languages and stuff. And so, they're going to great additions, and we're just going to have more voices and more sources and more background that we can bring to it. So pretty excited about that. That's kind of like very, very near future, but untold and unrealized future. So it feels like it's a little nebulous because we don't quite know how it's going to work out yet, but pretty excited about that.
Well, that sounds amazing.
Cool.
I can't wait.
Me neither.
All right, we're going to go ahead and transition a little bit and talk about The Chosen. So I had heard about this for quite a while, and I was like, everyone is talking about The Chosen. I need to find out what's going on. Come to find out, since I'm on YouTube, I found out that Daryl Ease is actually the, I think, executive producer or so that helped raise the funds and everything. And he's also a YouTuber. I was like, oh, okay. So there was kind of like a convergence on, kind of a couple topics. But I started watching it, and I love The Chosen. It's just the humor. There's just so many things about it. So first question we have is, what are some of the things you like most about The Chosen? And we're going to give Brent a little bit of a reprieve on his voice here. And we're going to have like all the co-hosts kind of share about, what they like most about the podcast, about Chosen. So we'll start out with the Singhs and then go through to the Brogs, and then I'll share, and then Brent will share closing out.
Sure. Would you like to go first?
You go ahead.
Sure. All right. At this age, I'm 54 years old. One of the things that I like are things that make me think. I'm not. I mean, I like to listen or hear things or watch things that I agree with, but really, that's not what tickles me at this point in time. I want something that actually rubs me the wrong way, or rubs me something that is not that familiar with how I think. And so the way I would evaluate a sermon, so to speak, or a book is, did it make me think differently, or at least give me pause in my thought? That's what The Chosen did for me. It brought about some different angles and some thought that says, Tony, have you thought about this before? And then I will get myself opening up the Bible and say, did it actually say that? I mean, wow, it seemed like a big point that I totally missed.
Yeah.
And having been a follower of Christ for 35 years, I was a little embarrassed, and so that's the idea. It's challenging the way that I think, and I love that about it.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, I think it's just the color it brings to the gospel. I think we've had for many years, sort of one type of theatrical presentation of the gospel, and it didn't really tend to be super accurate historically, but I love that this seems to have that element to it. And again, like Tony, sometimes, the way characters are portrayed, I have to actually take a step back and go, is that actually true? Like, were they really like that? Because I don't know, I can sometimes glamorize the gospel and people aren't as real as I am, and yet when you watch this, there's a reality to these people that I appreciate. So,
yeah. Kind of piggybacking off what you just said, Melanie, I think the thing that I love about The Chosen is just the raw humanity that's explored. I think that was one of the things. I didn't grow up in a spiritual household, and I think much like what you said, I love the wording that you use, glamorizing the gospel and scripture. I think I knew stories, but the way that I viewed even Jesus was, this pious shepherd with a lamb around his neck. It's, what you commonly see on the wall somewhere. And I remember when I first started studying the Bible, and I was reading through the book of John, and I saw that moment where Jesus walked into Jerusalem, and he sees all of the people in the temple court exchanging money and what it had become. And he was just filled with this righteous indignation, and then went away to go build, to make this whip fully intending to use it. And that level of humanity was just never something I'd ever seen before. And so I was immediately taken with who Jesus was. And so going through The Chosen right now is almost like reliving that moment when I was studying the Bible. Like, dude, Jesus is so cool. And I love that reminder of just the humanity of Jesus. Yeah.
I might be the shallow one in the group, but I'm just stoked that they're not speaking with a British accent.
or Swedish.
I didn't want to say that, Damon, but you brought it up. So
right.
I love that they dare to try and use reasonable creative license to fill in, as Melanie had mentioned, bring color to some of the stories that we're familiar with. Of all the scenes that I've watched there in season 1, the conversation between Jesus and Nicodemus is the one that stands out to me the most. I mean, it brought me to tears. Yeah. And I've never been brought to tears reading through that conversation just in Scripture. I love that dialogue in John 3, but I've never been brought to tears by it.
Yeah.
And in watching The Chosen, I was that moved. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, as I've gone through The Chosen, I'll just share a few things briefly. I love the humor. I think there's a certain way that humor can be like sappy or just, I don't really like it. But I think the humor in The Chosen, it's just perfect the way that it's done. I also love what Damon shared, how from what I can tell, it's pretty true to Scripture. I think they've done a really good job to be as accurate as possible, but they've also have taken creative license to fill in the gaps with stories that actually, in my opinion, make some of the arcs of the Scripture make more sense. Like when Peter was fishing and the story was, at least in The Chosen, that he owed a lot of money and he just looked down on himself so much. And when Jesus came and, had him go out fishing one more time, he was like, away from me, I'm a sinful man. And that like makes more sense to me. Again, I'm not saying that's like 100% accurate or whatever, but I think the way the arcs have been done, how they filled in certain things, really helped me understand the stories better. Even for example, how they have shown, Matthew, the tax collector, and his booth and just his story. I could go on, but there's just so many, really good things that they've shown. I most particularly probably like the arcs, how they have certain points that they feel they really want to stress, whether it's the story with Nicodemus or Matthew took a long time to be converted, and there was a lot going on there. So they have like certain arcs that they've deliberately decided to focus on, which I think has been just done really, really well. So what about you, Mr. Brent? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I would definitely recommend going to The Chosen's YouTube channel and checking out some of their some of the conversations that Dallas has, like going through their production philosophy. Like he talks about how, we looked at Scripture and history and we set that over religious tradition. It's like, okay, that's great.
Yeah.
When we're using the text directly, are we being accurate to what the text says? Mm-hmm. And if we're not, is it plausible? Love it. And like, we're not gonna be beholden to any one faith tradition. We're not trying to please anyone with the decisions that we make. We're gonna take the convictions of the Holy Spirit that we feel, and we're gonna put that into production. And we have, spiritual advisors, and we have writing partners. Like, we have some checks on that, so we're not doing something ignorant or stupid that we don't realize, but we're going to hold to our convictions. We're not going to try to please everyone. I love that. So just like the kinds of information like that Dallas shares, like he's got so much of that where you just go through, it's like, oh man, they're just so thoughtful and so considerate, and they know the Bible well. Like so many moments where it's like, oh, is that oh, they must have made that up. But then you go back and read the story, it's like, oh no.
No.
They actually say that. It's right there. So like they're just, it's so good. Like they know what they're doing. And I mean, God definitely seems to be in the midst of every aspect of the production in so many ways. So
yeah, I'm also just really glad that it's free. You don't have to be on any, you just need to be on the app. And I think they're going for 7 series. So, prayerfully they'll be able to keep raising the funds they need through crowdsourcing and so forth. Okay, next question is, other than Jesus, because we're all going to say Jesus, who, that's always the right question in Sunday school, right? And the character of Jesus is just done perfectly also in The Chosen. But other than Jesus, who is your favorite character in the Chosen series and why? So we're gonna start with the Brogs this time, and then we're gonna go international. Then I'm gonna go, and then we'll come to Brent. Give him a little reprieve again.
Mine is Mary, because she was tortured just as a soul. She was just, and I think that resonates with all of us, I think, on some level, if we're being honest. We know what it's like to just feel like you're not even in control anymore. And for not just her transformation, but the way she's portrayed in subsequent episodes after she's come to follow Jesus, she's probably the most peaceful of all the characters. At least that's the way I see her. Yeah. And yet she was the most tumultuous prior to coming to Christ. So she's my favorite character.
Yeah. I would have to say at this point, it's Nicodemus for me. And I think there's a couple of reasons. One, I think obviously we're seeing him evolve throughout the first series here. Maybe not evolving where we'd like him to be, but he wasn't evolving like we'd like him to see even in Scripture, as far as his discipleship to Jesus. But I think the thing that I've loved about his character is his willingness to ask the right questions. Questions are a huge thing for me. I think they're critically important because you can't get to the other side of anything without asking the right question. And he's asking the right questions. And one of the questions that just kind of struck me, and I think it was that scene, it was the episode of the Sabbath, and he's standing there and he's looking at this tapestry, that whole interaction between he and his wife. And he made a comment along the lines of, I wonder how much, we're missing. And I think it's a right and good question, I think, for any follower of Jesus to ask. Is there something that I'm missing? Or am I just content, like a lot of the Pharisees and Sadducees would be, to just kind of, resist and stay in the status quo and not really ever grow? You're just upholding this ideal. And so I think right now, he's definitely my favorite character. I love the arc of his character, his interactions with his wife. It's beautifully done.
Yeah. Without embellishing it too much, Levi the tax collector and the consternation and the challenge, the juxtaposition of his responsibility to the Romans, as well as seeing this Jesus and the impact that he's having. And maybe we can relate to some consternation even in our own lives. And that's why I was drawn to the tax collector. And to me, it painted a picture that I never thought about him in that manner. And it just really got me again thinking, and it humanized him and his conversion process in getting and helping others to become Christian, and even open up my mind to helping others as they're on their journey, and perhaps seeing Levi the tax collector with them. So he certainly intrigued me severely.
Well, it's been a really long time since I watched the first season, but I do remember Levi. So I can't actually think of a favorite character, but I do remember one thing about Levi that was interesting is how they kind of painted him as sort of an OCD. Like, I thought that was kind of interesting. You know, again, those types of things in The Chosen were so interesting to me. Because I don't think of them that way. They're so superhuman to me. And then I look at that and I'm like, no, they were just ordinary people with quirks and personalities. And, you know, and I never gave Levi a personality. I just never gave him that much thought. So anyways.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I love Peter's character. I think to see him messing up, you know, so much, I think it starts out with him in a fight, you know, and just to see him go through a transformation, which was quite a long arc in quite a bit of the series, to being someone who, you know, wants to protect the Son of God. It's just, I just love his character. And then his humor, how he kind of plays around with, you know, other people, but they're not too mean to each other. And then just his friendship with his wife. So I think Peter's just an amazing character to me.
So I'm going with Eden. She is just an amazing picture of the Etzer Kenegdo. What we translate more as opposed support, all the way back in episode 2 of Bema. The suitable helper, as it has been traditionally translated. Her fire and her passion, her willingness to push back against what Simon is doing, but also her support for him when he gets called and he goes back to tell her about that, like her relief for him to like find a better path, like the yearning that she had for him to come back from, you know, the destructive path that he was on. I just love that character so much. For a character that they had to create entirely, no supporting text in scripture to figure out what she should be like. I think they did an amazing job creating that character.
Yeah,
Awesome.
it's a very. I hope they make it to season 7. I definitely love the series.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to transition as we get a little bit closer here. We have a time just for sharing. So I just want to get a chance. I'll go ahead and start out. We'll have Damon and Ivy go next, and then the Singhs. Just about Bema and just about Brent, just your impact, you know, on us through the podcast. I think for myself, I'm a little bit of a late bloomer, where I didn't start listening to it, you know, until recently. But it, to me, lined up with a lot of other things that I had been studying over the last few years from a different angle. And I think one of the big things is how you guys go through and break down scripture to really provide a lot of context and understanding and true meaning to things. Like I really never had I kind of knew that the day starts at night, but never really took it as deeply as I could until you guys shared about that, you know, in your podcast. And obviously the chiasms, it's just like...
That's a mind blower.
Yeah, exactly. Someone had in the chat, mind blown. There's just so many things. It's like the movie that you want to go back and watch over and over again because you missed so many things. And I think one of the things that, Marty and you share about is when you encounter a problem in the Bible, oh, that's glorious. That's not something to kind of and be angry about why doesn't it fit with everything else, but like, wait a minute, there's something here, let me study that out more. And I think that's just been just amazing. I think for yourself personally, I know Marty has his skill set, and I think everyone's familiar with that on the teaching side, but there's a lot of the stuff on the background that you keep up with as far as the different ligaments and connections and the different groups that are out there. And even just keeping the trains running on time. And I guarantee you, I would not survive more than a few episodes of getting questions from Marty on every little thing, I'd be like, you know what? Hey man, I don't know that one either. But you do such a great job. I know you've studied this, but you do such a great job of, responding to the questions, and you have just a great nature, about you. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that too. I think for me, the thing that I most appreciate is that it really does scratch that itch for me to take the text so much deeper than just the face value. I think from the early days after I studied the Bible, I was converted when I was 19. And, you're not, at that point, you're not looking stuff up on the interweb, like you're going and you're hunting down, at a bookstore or a library, and you're looking up, commentaries and Bible helps and going into the original languages from like literal books that smell so yummy. And so like that whole journey for me, it's just kind of taken me to where I'm at right now. And then in about 2017, I started in a whole different perspective. I started actually illustrating the Bible. And that helped me to kind of see the Bible from a whole different perspective as well. And then like Otama, I was a little bit late to the game. I'm like, what is this thing? Okay, I'll check it out. And I feel like what Bema, what you and Marty do is an audio version of what I strive to do in my times with God, which is just get into the text, take it deeper than face value, take it deeper than what I know, look for the problems, and understand why it's there. And I think, I just appreciate from your perspective, I'm sure you probably sometimes feel shell-shocked and, if you get asked the right question or the wrong question. But I love that about you because you balance that out. Bema podcast isn't something you listen to and go, okay, well, these dudes are just out of my league and I can't listen to it. You're the question guy. And again, you can't get to the answers without asking the right questions. And I think whether they were given to you at the beginning or not, or where you're at now, you're asking the right questions, and you're asking the questions that we all want to know. And I think that's what makes the Bema podcast so powerful to me, because those are questions that I feel like not only do I need to be asking them, but they're ones that I have been asking, and now I'm able to get the answers. And so I just super appreciate the work that you guys do.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wish I could remember who it was, but somebody told me one time that I am the voice of the people.
I don't disagree with that. That's very true. Yeah. You're the, wait, what?
You go ahead and take it, Tony and Melanie.
Okay.
Okay, so for me, my husband was the one who first started listening to Bema, and he's like, babe, you got to listen to this. It's amazing. So he's always trying to discover new things. So when I first started listening, the first 2 episodes, I was like hooked, and I loved it. And I loved the Eastern versus Western perspective. But as it started getting into Torah, I was like, it was almost like I threw it away. I was like, no. And I think part of it is because I grew up in a very, I grew up Catholic. And so it's a very strict kind of tradition. There isn't a lot of personal exploration of the Bible. And then I was converted into a non-denominational Christianity where I saw things for the first time in the Bible that I didn't know. I mean, like when the first time somebody said Mary wasn't a virgin, I was like, that's wrong, and you need to stop saying it. So for me, just coming to scripture, in the Protestant faith was like this big awakening for me. And I love black and white. It's a secure place. It's, oh, I'm with God, I found God. And so, and I'm married to somebody completely opposite. He is always exploring, always looking, always striving. But I think the thing that I love that's repeated over and over again is this idea of story in Bema, right? That there is a story here with God and his people. And it's consistent throughout the podcast. And I love that because I feel like I have a voice in that. I have a part in that. God wants to partner with me in that. And even when I come up against these things where I'm like, no, that like ordinary people, how are they going to know this? And like, so ordinary people now have to know all this stuff to connect with God. That's what my natural black and white framework wants to do. But when I push through all of that and I go, no, let's back up from the emotion of it and let's listen to what this is saying and how it fills the story out. It's been profound and I love it. And it's actually really connected me with some of my roots, the mystics, things that I kind of threw off when I left the Catholic faith. It's kind of connected me back to that. And it's okay to take this journey and see where God leads you and see what God opens up. And it doesn't have to be in this tight framework of black and white. So I have to say, Bema is one of those things I can't actually do every day. Like I have to take it in chunks and then go back and rest with it for a bit and come back at it. But yeah, I so am grateful for what you guys have done and the way that God is using you. And I look forward to see how it changes. We are actually all a part of the same church family of churches, and all around our churches, you hear people are tuning in to Bema podcast, and I love how it's even changing our conversation from our church history past to what we're all going through now, and it's been phenomenal. So thank you for putting in the work and the effort, because I know that takes time out of your life, right? But I'm grateful for what you guys are doing.
Yes. 3 quick things. Trust the story has become a familiar refrain and has deepened my faith. Secondly, this whole idea and concept moved from a theoretical thing to a point of actually engagement. That is this idea of wrestling with God. And it actually has afforded me the opportunity when I'm counseling people and when they're going through a time, it's okay to wrestle with God. As a matter of fact, God's Son is known as one who wrestled with God, right? And that was a profound way that was elevated in my own mind. And thirdly, this idea that questions, lean into questions that comes in the scriptures. It's not a time to cover my eyes and run away and be scared of it. As a matter of fact, it's there for a reason. And, that's some of the refrains, but that has been very profound for someone who is, not on the younger side. I'm 54 years old, like I said, and I've started this journey with God for a long time. And to have something challenge my thinking and infuse me with faith and thinking certainly is tremendous. And for you, Brent, one of the things that stands out to me is the idea of being scholarly without being pretentious, right? That's what you have brought about, this dynamic to this, and it's that relatable. So I really appreciate it a ton, and I have been benefited incredibly because of the Bema podcast. So thank you so much.
Oh, I love hearing those stories. So
trust the story. Well, thank you so much for the first section here. We got some we're going to go to the lighter side now.
Yeah.
Okay. And so
I was really going to get to know.
Yeah, exactly right. You thought those questions were. Now we're going to really fire some questions and see how well you are going to answer these questions spontaneously. Okay. You ready, Brent?
I'm ready.
All right. Here's the first one. You better brace yourself. What's your favorite cuisine?
Oh man. Well, I used to say Italian, but I mean, I guess it's not that recently. It was 10 years ago, but I found out that I don't really, my body does not really like dairy very much. And even more recently than that, I've decided that I don't really like a lot of like heavy breads and stuff. So Italian is a little bit more complicated. Not that you can't get something great in the Italian style, but I mean, I would probably say American, but there's lots of stuff that I wouldn't necessarily like about American food either. So just like the general idea of like meats and fruits and vegetables and not so much grains and breads or dairy. Okay. So if you can call that a cuisine, that is my favorite.
I need to make some curry for you, Brent. Yes. I need to make some curry for you.
Caribbean, actually. All right.
Sure. My wife absolutely loves curry. She makes it all the time.
Oh, that's awesome.
Nice. Okay, this might date you a little bit, but what is your favorite film or series?
So I'm a total Star Wars nerd. Yeah, and I might as well abolish any possible friendships here. So I love the original trilogy. Don't like the prequels at all. And then of the newest trilogy, my favorite is The Last Jedi, which is seemingly everyone's least favorite. So that's where I stand with all the Star Wars stuff.
Well, if our son is watching, if he's tuning in, I think he might actually agree with you.
That's right. Okay. If you have a morning routine, what is it?
It is to not be awake in the morning. This is my routine, if possible.
I love it. I love it.
If I had zero obligations, I would probably sleep from about 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. That's kind of my natural. I never do that because, there's lots of things happening. But that is what I would love to do.
I see.
But as far as I get up, I take a shower. I don't know, pretty normal routine stuff.
All right, true test of your theology. Which do you prefer, a paper Bible or a digital Bible? I'm going to see how scholarly you are.
Yeah, I am digital Bible all the way. And I have been for probably, I know for sure I haven't carried a paper Bible since I've been married. And it was probably a few years before that. So I'm coming up on 10 years of marriage. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I like you again, Brent. We're all in sync.
Well, honestly, I love books. I love seeing books. I love cover design. I love page design. I love figuring out how big should the margins be? What typography should you use? I love the smell of books. Ivy was saying something about that earlier, I think. Yeah. All of that is great, but then actually using it, it's I can only carry so many things. So having I absolutely reference 3 or 4 different translations plus Greek and Hebrew. I just have so much more flexibility, and it takes no more space than my phone. So
Yeah.
Okay, what's your favorite? Speaking of books, but I'll narrow that. What's your favorite book of the Bible right now, so to speak? Do you think like that?
I don't typically, but right now I've been spending a lot of time in Isaiah. I don't even remember how it got started. I think my wife was working on memorizing a portion of Isaiah, and my older son, who's almost 3, he would ask my wife to read that passage. And he's not that great with numbers, so she was working on Isaiah 58, but then he was asking me for Isaiah 55. And so then for some reason he asked for Isaiah 61, and then sometimes he mixes up the 60 part and says 50. So we've been doing Isaiah 51. And so he'll ask for one of those 4 chapters every night. And so I've been spending a lot of time in Isaiah recently, and it's great.
Awesome.
Amazing.
The fun part of Isaiah too, for whatever reason. Right? We're in the hopeful end of Isaiah.
Nice. What about a favorite Bible character?
I have always loved John. I love the way he writes. I love that his gospel is a completely different perspective than all the others. And that's the thing that I've learned in Bema, is that even the other three gospels, I was like, oh, those other three gospels, they're all the same. It doesn't really matter which one. And it's like, okay, well, actually there's unique advantages to every single one of them. So I appreciate the other gospels more than I used to, but I still just I love John so much. I love his heart. I love talk about the chosen, like him sitting on the staircase telling Andrew to shush because he's writing down what Jesus and Nicodemus are talking about. It's like, oh, I love that so much. So yeah, John has always been, and actually when I was first born, my parents named me John, and then about within a few hours they changed their mind and decided that I was not a John, but that was my name for the first little bit of my life. And so I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but I've always connected with the character of John.
That's a neat little story. Okay, outside of the Bible, what's your favorite book and who's the author of that book? It's a two-parter. And what book do you think every person should read within the next year?
Oh man. So I'm a terrible, terrible reader. I've set a goal for myself this year to read 6 books. And what is happening here? Somebody's.
Oops. It's light.
I have visitors on the other side of the blankets. So
the original podcast, baby.
That's right. That's right.
No editing.
It's completely out of my control. We've got the duck, which the duck is up here in the corner watching over us. So whatever the duck says goes, I guess. But yeah, so I've set a goal for myself to read 6 books this year, and I think I'm on track to do it. But I was such a good reader when I was a little kid. I read books like crazy. And then something happened, I think in middle school, where I just started getting into other stuff and slowly started like fading away from it. And I have not had a good reading habit for a very long time. And so I'm trying to get back into it. So I don't really know that I have like a great answer to favorite book, because I just haven't read that much, because Bema has changed my perspective on so much. And so it's like, man, I really did like that book back then, but if I read it again now, would I think the same thing? And I don't know. So I hesitate to say a favorite book, but one of the books that I've read this year is called Unfettered by Mandy Smith. We actually are having her on the podcast in a couple of weeks to talk about that book, and that book was amazing. If you are someone who doesn't really know how to engage with the like mystical, spiritual side of your relationship with God, it is life transforming. If you're already really good at that, maybe it's just like, oh yeah, great, love it. But for me, being like a very literal, love the black and white stuff, love, like I don't know about like. I'm not very charismatic. I don't feel comfortable around that. Like, her book was amazing. So, yeah, I'll have a lot more to say about that on the podcast, but I would recommend people read Unfettered by Mandy Smith.
Cool.
Awesome.
He's going to be on Image Bearers in August.
Oh, awesome.
That's amazing.
Good stuff. All right. We'll put 2 questions together. Where's been your favorite place to live and the second to visit?
Okay, so place to live as in a place that I've actually lived?
Yes.
Okay, so where I am now is probably my favorite place. We live, Moscow, Idaho. It's a small town, about 24,000 people.
Not Russia, right? So you said Moscow before, so it's not Russia.
No, and that's the distinction, not Moscow, Russia, Moscow, Idaho. But yeah, I love it. We live 5 blocks off of Main Street, so I walk all over the place. I actually have an app that like I use my watch to track my walks, and then I have a way to like overlay all those workouts on a map. And so I'm working on walking every single street in Moscow, which for such a small town, you would think it wouldn't be that challenging, but I've been working on it for a couple of years. Because it's like every time I cover a street, then to get to a place that I haven't covered before is such a longer walk. So occasionally I've like driven to a different point and walked from there or whatever. But I just love this town. It's not so small that there's nothing going on. But it's not so big that it feels overwhelming or like that I can't know everything about it. Like I feel like I'm there's always new stuff to figure out, but it's fun that way. And it's a college town, so there's like lots of stuff going on with the university. But then in the summer, all the students go away. But that doesn't make the town dead. Like there's a very vibrant list of events that happens throughout the summer. So there's always something going on. And like 5 blocks off of Main Street, like I can walk, and the big park where a lot of stuff happens is like 3 blocks away in the other direction. So I can just go anywhere in the town on foot. And so I love living here. As far as where to visit, is this a place that I've never visited before, or just?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Moscow, Russia.
Yeah.
Potatoes make vodka.
Yeah, I'm not really a huge vodka person. I mean, as far as if you're going the alcohol route, I guess I would probably want to go to Scotland and try some of the Scotch. I feel like I don't really know how to appreciate Scotch, but it definitely intrigues me. I've always been really drawn to Chile for some reason, since I was a little kid. And so I would love to go there, but I more recently, I feel super drawn to New Zealand. I just love so much of what is going on there, and just like I don't know. I've had a chance to talk to a few people. There was an exchange student when I was in college who was a friend of a friend, and so just have like these weird connections to New Zealand all over the place, and so I kind of feel a draw to New Zealand. So I think New Zealand is my final answer.
So here, this question will reveal the most about your character and who you are. You ready? You ready for the drum roll? Okay. If you could place a billboard in the middle of Moscow, your city, what would it say? And it can't be a picture of Brent in the middle of
Oh, I definitely would not do that. So where is my iPad? I don't know if you're gonna be able to see this, but no, I don't think you're gonna be able to read it. Anyway, so I have my Apple Pencil engraved with this phrase "Ayin Tova," which is something we talk about in session 3 in the Gospels, and it's the idea of a good eye. And seeing people with a good eye, and seeing people in the best light, and assuming the best about people. And like if there's any possible explanation for whatever their behavior is, if you can say, oh, well, I understand that because they must be going through this. If there's any possible way to explain it, like that's how you have to see people. And so I love that concept. And so I don't know if putting that on a billboard would mean anything to anyone, but that's what I would love to put on a billboard.
Well, at least bring about a lot of conversations for sure.
Right.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
Exactly right.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks for giving us some insight there on the lighter side of who Brent is. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
What we're going to do now is get a chance for some Q&A. So we'll take a moment just to see what comes in on the chat. I do know that Ivy has a few questions, so we'll also, kind of see what she has. We're not going to go too long. It's we're about an hour and 13 in right now or so. And I think that obviously, with your voice, we don't want to tax you too much. So we'll probably go, 2-3 questions and then probably call it a day. So I guess, Ivy, do you want to start with one of the questions that you have? And then we'll wait and see if any come through on the chat. Maybe we'll take a couple of those, or maybe two of yours, and then kind of call it a day.
Sure. Let's see. One of them that that I had written down was how has the Chosen series specifically transformed your view and your understanding of Jesus, and how has that affected your discipleship to him? Especially because you're so black and white,
Yeah. I think like seeing the portrayals, like we talk, obviously in the podcast, we talk a lot about like the idea of Jesus having God goggles, and like having special abilities or special information that humans can't have. And so we talk about like, well, maybe not. Like Philippians 2, he was God, but he didn't use that to his advantage. So the degree to how much he set that aside, and obviously, like, Jesus was not sinful, so he's not going to have any of that brokenness that we experience through sin. Although I think, like, the people around him were still sinful. So I think even that he has an understanding of, like, what is the brokenness that sin causes. Like, he's been hurt by sin, even though he hasn't sinned himself. So I think seeing the portrayal of Jesus' humanity, even though I had already had that perspective, like, oh, we definitely feel like he set aside his divinity. Like, he spent time in prayer and learned stuff from the Father. He was in touch with the Spirit. He was, and that all of that seems like stuff that we can do if we're willing to put the time into it. If we're willing to go off and pray, if we're willing to be in touch with whatever the Father is doing, like, that's all achievable for us. Are we going to do it as well or as completely as Jesus did? Probably not, but that's what we're shooting for, and it does seem achievable to some degree. So having that perspective is one thing, but then seeing the humanity of Jesus portrayed, like, oh, I guess he probably did have to brush his teeth. Oh, he did probably trip over a log and scrape his knee or whatever. Just seeing some of the ways that they've portrayed that has been really good for, like, feeling like, oh yeah. So Jesus obviously is this whole different level of human than what I am. But at the same time, there's so much more I can relate to him about than you would initially think. And even just like the conversation with when the paralytic was lowered down through the roof and he healed him, and he was having this conversation with Shmuel, and he makes a comment about whatever he's thinking. And Shmuel goes back and he's like, he knew what I was thinking, but then I thought about it. And I'm like, of course he knew what I was thinking. What else would I be thinking? So it's like, okay, so there are explanations for, like, if you don't know any better, you look at that situation like, how did he know what he was thinking? Like, he must be taking advantage of the fact that he's God and he can know people's thoughts. But it doesn't seem like that's necessarily the case. Like, it doesn't have to be the case. And maybe there were moments like that, but there's also moments like, you know, somebody, I'm sure this has happened to you guys, where somebody gets in touch with you like, hey man, I was just thinking about you. And I had this idea in my head and I just felt like I should share that with you. And it's like, what? How could you possibly know how that's exactly what I needed to hear right now? Right. And so, like, those sorts of things can happen. And, I think Jesus is our example in way more ways than we think, because so much of what he did, he set aside his divinity, and then he put in the work to be connected to God in the way that we can be connected to God.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So just taking from, like, season 1 of Chosen up to this point, can you think of one instance where they have displayed a historically accurate situation that, even though you might have talked about it on Bema or studied it out over, you know, even the last decade or so, that seeing it portrayed and having those lines filled in the Chosen, that you're just like, whoa, that's crazy. I'm seeing that a whole different way. What would that one thing be?
I think maybe the idea of him, like in episode 3, where he's hanging out with all the kids and he's talking about different elements of the kingdom and different teachings that we see from later in the Gospels. So Marty's always said, like, the Sermon on the Mount, like, maybe that was one big thing, but all of those individual teachings he was probably talking about many other times in many other places. So and seeing that, like, okay, so here he's just sitting around with a bunch of kids and this stuff comes up. And then we see more of those when they're sitting around the house before he healed the paralytic. And yeah, so just seeing like, oh, these conversations were just ongoing over years and years and years. And, you know, I don't know if you'd say he's refining it or he's adapting it to different circumstances. To, like, you know, in one case, you know, a kid is asking him about something, but then in another case, this woman is asking him about it. And so he adjusts the story to fit their situation or whatever their question is. So I think seeing that, like, knowing like, oh, this is an ongoing wrestling match. These conversations are not like, okay, I'm going to say this one time and you guys better all write it down because I'm never going to say it again. So I think that's been good to see, like they, and going back to that idea of like meeting together daily, like these guys were always together, always wrestling through this stuff. And it's not going to be the same stuff every day, but over the course of 3 years, you're going to hear some of the same stuff more than once.
Right.
So I really appreciate that portrayal.
All right. Well, we're gonna wrap it up right here. I definitely appreciate you taking time to join the podcast today, Mr. Brent, and also everyone else taking time out of your day. I know it's a Friday night. You could be chilling, watching Star Wars, or eating Italian, or is it American, or is it? Okay. So we could be doing a lot of things, but we took time today to really just join, and I definitely appreciate that, and I believe those that watch definitely appreciate it, you know, too. I guess one of the takeaways that I have, you know, just for all of us watching is, you know, let's definitely lean into the areas of Scripture that we find challenging. Yeah. I think a lot of us in Western society are very black and white, as has been shared. And we do not deal with nuance very well at all. And I think the other thing is the Bible is so beautiful and so rich. I think, you know, it takes things perhaps like Chosen, it takes things like Bema for us to really understand just what we have in our hands. Right. But let's definitely dive in. Let's not get jaded with what we've read, and just keep plumbing the depths of this marvelous book. And not just reading it to read it or accumulate more knowledge, but to find ways that we can live it out and, you know, have soft hearts and make a difference in this world. So that's where we're going to wrap it up. I think those of you that watched this episode and enjoyed it, we do have another one that I'll be linking that you guys can click on. That was when Marty was able to join us. It's also in the show notes. And I will also put in the show notes the awesome lesson that we had with the Singhs when they visited us in Detroit, and also when I had a chance to chat with the Brogs in reference to getting some time to rest and some lessons about humility and whether or not an angel reached out to Damon or not. And you'll have to watch the episode yourself, which I'll put in the show notes, to find out if that's true. And it's an amazing, amazing story. So thanks so much for your time. Definitely have a great rest of the night.
Thanks for allowing us to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks, Ivies.